Welcome to the course Full Stack Web Development. In this video, we are going to see about the MVC architecture. This is actually one of the web application architecture pattern. This MVC architecture, the MVC stands for Model, View and Controller. This is actually a design pattern. It provides reusable solution for commonly occurring problems. That is, it provides a structure framework for organizing components and their interaction. It actually separates an application into three main logical components: model, view and application. Model, view and also the controller. So this architecture pattern, so while we are following this architecture pattern for designing any application, this actually split that whole application into three different parts. One is model, second one is view and the third one is controller. Each architectural component is built to handle specific development aspects of an application. That is, here we are having the three different components, each component for responsible for some functions. It is the one of the famous web development framework to create scalable and extensible project. It is also used for designing mobile application. We can also use this MVC design pattern for the mobile applications. So this MVC architecture, this mainly consists of three components. The first component is model. This represents the data and also actual business logic. The second component is view. This displays the result to the user. So that is the responsible of view component. And the third component is controller. This acts as intermediary between the model and also the view. So this is actually pictorial representation of model, view and controller architecture. So here we are developing the three separate components for handling any request of the user or for satisfying the user requirements. And here each and every component, they can interact with each other in some way. So for example, so here we are seeing how this MVC design pattern that we are used with the web application. So normally we know that nowadays we are developing the web application based on the three-tier architecture. So in the three-tier architecture, we are having the three different parts. One is client part, second one is database part, and the third one is our server part. And we know that whenever we are sending the request to the server, so that will be execute that, or that will be handle the request, and if it request, so this will be refer the database for getting the information or storing any information or updating information and send the result back to the client. So while we are following this MVC architecture, when the client sends the request, so we know that the client not directly access the information from the database. For example, if the client want to know the author of some books, so they send that request and the client does not directly take the information from the database. So when the client places the request, so this is the received by the one of the component of MVC, so that is called as controller. So the controller component that receive the client request. Here the client sends the request to the controller component, and the controller component that also not directly linked to the database. This send the request to the model component. Here the model component that can implement the business logic and also that can directly interact with the database. So this component search the information from the database and it retrieve the result, and now this result is sent back to the controller component. So while the client send the request to accessing the database, that is first received by the controller component, and now the controller transfer the request to the model. So here this model component that can directly interact with the database So this will be retrieve the necessary information and that is sent back to the controller component. And here now the controller component have the raw information. This is normally not understandable by the client. They don't have any programming idea. So we need to produce the result that can be understandable by any client. So we are using the third component that is called as view. Now the controller component that forward the raw data to the view component. Here this view component that will be rendering the data and it's generate the final view. So the work of the view component is that get the input as the raw data from the controller and that will be create the view or the result that is understandable by end user and it send back the result to the client. So this is the basic MVC architecture. So we are having three component: client, database, server. This is a three-tier architecture. And for satisfying client requests, we are creating the web application and this web application implemented as the three different component while we are following this MVC. So here each and every component that has some responsibilities. First, the responsibilities of model component is interact with the database to store, retrieve and update the data. And the second one is executing business logic, that is actual uh, functionalities implemented in model component. And the third one, notifying the view and controller of state changes. If any data is changed, so that also notify to the both the component, that is view and also the controller. They may have the temporary copies. And the responsibilities of view components are: first one is rendering data to the user in a specific format, that is the format understandable by the user. Displaying the user interface element. Updating the display when the model changes. So when the model element make any changes on the database, that should also updated in the display. Then the responsibility of the controller components are: first one is receiving user input and interpreting it. So then only they can find out what actually the user requests. Updating the model based on the user actions. And final one is selecting and displaying the appropriate view to the user. So these are the responsibilities of controller component. So if we are going to implement the full stack application based on the Node.js. So here we are creating the using the JavaScript and it's a front end and back end. So here we are implementing the model component using JavaScript, controller component also using the JavaScript, and we are creating the view as a EJS file, that is embedded JavaScript. So here we can dynamically render the JavaScript into the HTML page.